Welcome to Watching the Throne.
A lyrical analysis of Kanye West.
My name's Chris Lambert.
My name's Travis Bean, and I really just wanted to give this season the intro it deserves. Like, we're setting in on dark fantasy, the opening track to my beautiful dark twisted fantasy. This is epic. This is next level. We're going to a different realm, Chris. Like, you need to get on my level.
I need to get higher. I need to lift up my energy.
I don't know if we can get higher.
Travis, I think I just had a breakthrough.
Uh-oh.
This first song is called Dark Fantasy. Wait. And the album is called My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Oh my God. There's still beauty in twistedness to come.
Do you think there's like a connection between the song title and the album title?
Nah, reach.
Yeah, you know me and my fanciful ideas.
You're always reaching for the stars. I like it though. I like that in you.
Trying to get higher. So high. Yeah, it would be nice if Kanye at one point named a song My Beautiful Twisted. I don't know.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
I guess there's other ways he could go about it, but just complete the name. The album name. I
mean, Monster is to twistedness and Runaway is to beauty.
There we go. It all comes together. See, yeah, Dark Fantasy, I mean, the song is quite the kickoff. And there's so much context getting into it. Like 808s and Heartbreak, when we were going through that season, we'd have maybe like 2, 3, 4 tabs open for different topics that we were going to talk about. And already for Dark Fantasy, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 tabs.
And I think I have even more than that open.
Okay.
I hope my computer doesn't crash in the middle of this.
It might. It's just going to be like, I can't do this anymore. And dies.
I get a little error message like, you can't talk about Dark Fantasy while you're recording. Like, we can't handle it.
No, it's too much. This is going too far. So already we're seeing just in the the research portion, like an escalation from where things were at with 808s, with a lot of 808s being in the like interesting and minimalist production, the emotion of the lyrics, and how each song tended to focus on another aspect of this relationship that was falling apart, and Kanye's relationship with himself, with the breakup, and with fame at this point in his life, and the mixing of those things. And we ended 808s and Heartbreak with Pinocchio Story, where Kanye is going on and on about real life and wanting to be a real boy, and how he feels like he is slipping from reality in a lot of ways and starting to live this kind of distorted life that is filled with meaningless like relationships, meaningless consumerism, and how low it is starting to bring him. And lo and behold, the next album is My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, where he continues to explore this idea that his life has taken a turn from reality into something stupendously horrific.
Yeah.
And he really starts to explore, as he did with Pinocchio Story, which is a fairy tale, but the original Pinocchio story was a dark fairy tale. It wasn't the Disney story. It wasn't even like the ending to the original story was happy in a lot of ways, but it wasn't supposed to be. The editor of the story and the publisher of the story was just like, hey man, I like this. It's cool and all that you want to teach a story, or you want to have a story that teaches kids that there's consequences to their actions, but could you maybe also show them that it's not all bad and that you can like have good things happen for behaving the right way? Guy's like, okay, sure. Fine. Yeah, but it was initially a tragedy. So that was like the energy that Kanye ended his last album with. And now with Dark Fantasy, he just brings us right back to the sense of the dark fairy tale.
Yeah. I mean, even the way The Adventures of Pinocchio originally ends, or actually ends after all the additions, where like Pinocchio wakes up in his new body and looks over and like the lifeless puppet's sitting there. Like there is even something like creepy about that.
Yeah.
and telling and symbolic about like leaving that life behind, like all these things you learned and graduating and growing. Like there's still like something twisted, I guess, about it all. Like, and I love that Kanye's acknowledging that and continues that here on Dark Fantasy, where he's referencing a couple different like fairy tale stories and really getting at the dark and sinister nature of them, and how like even if people will like come out on top in the end and achieve something, it doesn't come without a price. It doesn't come without like bloodshed and loss, and like it's just it's a very real look at these fairy tale-esque lessons we learn. And that's the path Kanye's really going down here. He's this whole song is basically like an overture for the album, where like we get this introduction. It's setting the table. It's setting the mood. We're getting all the instrumentation. It's bringing out the grandiosity of it all, and then we get the introduction of Kanye's character, and like it's just the first step in this dark fantasy we're about to hear.
Yeah, and as with most fantasies, you start with a sense of the ordinary and grounding the character in what is their day-to-day life. Whether for Cinderella, that's being like the sister that's put upon while the other sisters get to kind of live normal lives. You're made to cook and clean and wash, and you're kind of abused by your mother and your siblings, and this is your day-to-day life. Or you look at, what's another fairy tale? Say The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, where you have Ichabod Crane as just a schoolmaster, a teacher in this small town, and the first part of the story is just an introduction to the character, to his day-to-day life, what he does in Sleepy Hollow, the town itself, and there's nothing necessarily driving the narrative at that point. It's just, who are these people? What are they doing? What's this world we exist in? And really starting to ground the character. Wizard of Oz is another one that kind of comes to mind. Not quite animated, but a movie, that is in a lot of ways a fairy tale. And you start with Dorothy in Kansas, and just seeing her life on the farm and the relationship with her family, and how upset she is with like how boring Kansas is.
Yeah.
And the desires that start to come out of this ordinary world. And you can start to do that for so many, like pick any Disney movie, Alice in Wonderland, Lion King, Aladdin, Little Mermaid. I mean, they all kind of start in the same way, with this character in this normal space that they're not necessarily happy with until the call of adventure arises.
Yeah. And what Kanye's cool twist on that is, I feel like in all of those cases, like the sort of watered down fairy tale we've gotten used to, the character featured in the beginning, like there is a sort of grandiosity to the story. Like, something big is going to happen to this person. We're going to go on a long journey. But the people themselves, like sometimes are a bit faceless. Like they have personality and character and everything, but they're also like, they're well-intentioned, like they're down in their luck, like you're supposed to kind of feel for them. And that's definitely not what Kanye's doing here. Like he is somebody who's just like oozing bravado and ego. Like, I'm on top of the fucking world and you cannot touch me. Like, I'm the king of everything. I drive the best cars in the world. I get the hottest girls. It's such an interesting way it's a way we're not really used to this, to get somebody who we actively don't really want to root for right away.
Yeah, like you think about Aladdin and how like good of a guy Aladdin is portrayed to be. He like gives food to kids, and Kanye really sets up the anti-hero in this, in terms of he's somebody on top that is falling, and you start to care more about the character when you learn more about their like pain. It's the same structure he ends up using on Yeezus as well. But
I was going to say that though, the difference there is like, Yeezus is such a warped character that you almost feel for him right away. You're just like, oh man, something's wrong with this guy. Where in this, he's just like, I'm the fucking best and you should bow to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's something to where Yeezus is far more in the twisted fantasy. I I think that Kanye starts this album out a little more in the like ordinary world. Like Dark Fantasy, Gorgeous, and Power are a little more grounded before you get into the excessiveness of All of the Lights,
Right.
Monster, So Appalled, where Yeezus kind of starts you off with Monster or So Appalled, like just
Right.
that like energy level.
Yeah, that's a good point because like that's where we really dip into the fantasy and like we see Kanye like needing to go there and steep into celebrity. But these first three songs are really more like table setting. For Kanye, the character himself, like we're going to see in this album and who he is and what kind of environment he lives in, but also just like this bigger look at the world and Kanye's place in it. And I'm thinking like Gorgeous will get much more into like politics and everything.
Yeah.
But these first three songs really do get at that, like, who is this person that exists in this world before he takes a plunge?
Yeah. And we know that the album builds to Who Will Survive in America.
Right.
And Lost in the World, right? So there's like this idea of the world and specifically America being very important to the journey of this album. So Kanye in these first several songs needs to define that. Like,
Right.
what is his place in this world? What is the world? How does it look? It's same thing kind of with Dorothy in Kansas, right? Because the more you set up what her life is in Kansas, the more you can contrast it with Oz and the marvels of Oz, and the more that then contrasts her going back to Kansas and what it means to come home to the things that she has there.
Yeah.
So you need some of these elements up front in Dark Fantasy, Gorgeous, and Power to really set up a lot of the, I mean, what follows, but then specifically the ending and this idea that like Kanye is lost and wondering like how he or anyone else can survive in a society that is set up how it is, which is something he goes on to explore in far greater detail on Yeezus and still in a lot of ways on the life of Pablo. I mean, you think about where that album starts and where it ends with Saint Pablo and how much Kanye is still critiquing society and trying to figure out how to bring like God into his life and into the nightlife and be a messenger for people.
Yeah. And you're basically touching all this, but my favorite part of all that is this societal focus, this really broadened look, and then little tiny Kanye in there somewhere. like yeah, there's like his life comes across as huge and fits into this like big landscape, and he's able to speak on all these big issues. But songs like this, like Dark Fantasy, that set up somebody like grandiose and like, oh my gosh, look at this guy, is perfect for when later we get these really like intimate situations with him where he's really struggling with basic things we all struggle with, and it really zaps away the power and energy that he's been setting up for himself. So I mean, this song goes a long way in doing that.
Yes, very much so. Like just having that sense of contrast. And that's one of the things that we'll probably keep coming back to over this season, is talking about the ebbs and the flows of the character on this album in terms of the sense of power and superiority they're feeling.
Yeah.
And like the idea even set up in this song of like, can we get much higher? Usually in a narrative when somebody's just like, I'm like at the peak of everything.
Yeah.
It's like a red flag that they are about to fall.
you can't go any higher.
Yeah, you're about to have these series of like highs and lows that will follow, and that's absolutely what we see. So we'll be
Yeah.
getting into all of that. And then at some point we'll get into more. I don't know if this is the song of our Wizard of Oz structure theory. That probably happens on Power, but
End of Power, then like All of the Lights interlude. Yeah.
yeah, but just thinking of this album in terms of Kansas, Oz, Kansas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Before we start getting into some of the Lacrimosa and whatchamacallit, Roald Dahl, are there aspects of the production you want to talk about?
Well, no, we should talk about Lacrimosa because we don't know exactly what the opening sounds we're hearing are. I guess when I was listening to it today, I was like, oh, the beginning of Dark Fantasy, the song, is this really warped, distorted version of Lacrimosa from Mozart, and Lacrimosa is what opens the Runaway movie. So it literally goes from Lacrimosa, and then it blends right into the beginning of Dark Fantasy.
Yep. Yeah, that's what in the supercut that we heard, it really does sound like the distorted voices underneath.
Right.
Like definitely not just like lifted verbatim and inserted, but as if he was hearing those voices. And as you're saying, we know in the Runaway movie, he's using Lacrimosa.
Yeah.
So it's something to like, is that just in the movie because it felt like right for the opening credits, or is that something he was thinking about as he was putting this song together and wanted to have a complementary sound coming in?
Yeah, but even if it's not literally being sampled for Dark Fantasy, like you said, it's in the movie, so like we really do need to read into it.
Yeah. So Lacrimosa, Requiem, one of the most famous Mozart pieces, right?
Yeah, it's from God. I sound terrible because I should know this, but it's basically part of that unfinished whatever he was working on before he died.
Just his Requiem.
Yeah, the Requiem. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, which if you ever watch the movie Amadeus, which I'm a huge fan of and think everybody should watch, they really dramatize the creation of this piece.
Right.
And tie it to his death. And it's a really fascinating movie. I actually would like to ask Kanye what he thinks about the movie, you know?
Has the time passed for Amadeus? Like, do people even know it anymore?
That's a thing. Like, I feel like when I was in college, it still got talked about in like nerdy film circles.
Right.
Just because it won so many so many Oscars when it came out. I think it won like 8 Oscars. But I don't think people really talk about it anymore.
I really knew about it because it was in the IMDb Top 250, and I was going through all those and just watching them. And I remember loving it, but I haven't seen it in a long time, and I don't know if it still is in the Top 250 and if people still talk about it like that, so I don't know.
I never see anything about it on like
Not really.
Reddit or Twitter or anything like that where you see about other like top movies. I'm actually scrolling through
the Top 250.
Yeah, I'm at 70 right now. Number 75 is Hamilton.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Hamilton.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's like a great play, but I don't think it's the 75th best movie of...
You know, you could Control F Amadeus.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll do that. Find on page. Amadeus. Yeah, it's number 83, which means I already scrolled past it because I was at
pretty high.
Yeah, so still liked. It's right between the movie 3 Idiots, which is also a very good movie, and Braveheart.
Wow, that's quite the threesome right there.
Yeah, right. 3 Idiots, Amadeus, Braveheart, Inglourious Bastards, Good Will Hunting.
Jeez. Eclectic list.
Yeah. So, okay. Mozart was working on this when he died, and what Lacrimosa, as Wikipedia tells us, is a name that derives from Our Lady of Sorrows, a title given to the Virgin Mary. So religious elements to this.
Oh, I wouldn't have expected that.
Surprising. And
that's another big thing we should be watching out for. We talked about it a bit in the overview, but you know, Kanye's whole journey with God and him anointing himself to these divine levels, like that's all huge in the slow lead up to Jesus is King.
Yeah, because I mean, we see that Kanye's relationship with God in his discography, right? You have songs like Jesus Walks and Never Let Me Down, where he's very humble in terms of like, you know, this is my relationship with God. Like I'm praying to Jesus. Like, thank you, God. There's a, I guess I want to use the word honorific, but I didn't set up the right like syntax to use it. But Kanye is very honoring of God in a lot of the first 2 albums whenever he mentions Jesus or God. But once we start getting to this part of his discography, you're seeing a different relationship where it
Right.
seems to be, yeah, a little more blasphemous in ways where he's like putting himself on a level with God, which is something he would like explicably do on, is explicably the right word, on Jesus with I Am a God. So we can see the rise of the ego in some ways on this song, or on this album overall.
Yeah, and we had seen him do it a little bit. Like I'm thinking of Stronger when he's like, "New Gospel,
yeah.
homie, take 6." Like,
Yeah.
but it's again done in this more like naive, like oh man, like I'm awesome. Look how awesome I am, kind of way. That there's something more like wizened about Dark Fantasy. Like he really believes this. Like he thinks he is on top of the world and you cannot touch him.
Which I think makes sense if you're viewing it in the sense that Kanye is elevating this to like fantasy and really drawing out how insane his ego has become as he's disassociated in a lot of ways, to where like there is probably something to Kanye the person believing some of this. Like he does think he's awesome, he does
Right.
think he's the voice of a generation, right? But on the other hand, we do know that Kanye the artist is also aware of how hyperbolic all of this is.
Right.
So the fact that he is elevating in the way that he's elevating on Twisted Fantasy and Yeezus and in parts of The Life of Pablo is probably part of the showmanship, part of just the story and the exaggeration of fiction.
Right. And even thinking ahead to like I Am a God, like we know, okay, yeah, he's calling himself a god, and like you said, there's truth to that in the sense that like he thinks he is a bit of a messenger in a way, and that he has a leadership role and like he's kind of anointing himself, but he's also thinking of it in the literal sense, the way the Bible describes it, of like everyone has a god within them. Yeah. So it's this weird mix of like ego, like I think I'm awesome, with like a calling, like something he feels destined to do.
Yeah, with irony.
Yeah, right. In the storytelling sense, because you're right. In order for the character to fall, he has to be anointed to crazy levels.
Yeah, you need to like lift him up to tear him down to like grow the character.
Right.
Yep. Well, so for Lacrimosa,
yeah,
you do get these lyrics that come in. Full of tears will be that day, though it's in Latin, which is Lacrimosa. Dies illa, qua, resurget, ex favela.
I don't think we need that part.
No, full of tears will be that day when from the ashes shall arise the guilty man to be judged. Therefore spare him, O God, merciful Lord Jesus, grant them eternal rest. Amen. Can you think of anything, Travis, that would cause Kanye to be full of tears and the idea of being judged and hoping to rise from ashes? Was there anything going on in his life at that time that would cause him to relate to that?
Probably, I don't know. He wanted, he sat in line at the drive-through line at McDonald's for like a really long time and couldn't get his burger. I don't know. I can't think of anything, I guess, in Kanye's life specifically, though. That are you alluding to something?
It's just like an awards ceremony.
An awards. He's won a lot of awards. You're gonna have to narrow it down.
Like a 2009 awards ceremony at like MTV Video Awards.
I'm seeing a white woman. That's all I'm getting, though.
I did not. Just makes me think of Bo Burnham now. White woman's Instagram.
Standing on stage, everybody's cheering for her and happy about some dumb video she had. That's all I got.
It wasn't the best video, but it won best video.
Uh-huh.
Actually, it won best female video, and then Beyonce won best video. But yeah,
really?
The Taylor Swift incident. We know how huge of a turning point that was for Kanye, as he was like a beloved star, though with some controversy, and then 808s and Heartbreak happens, and suddenly there's more flack than he had ever received before, as not everybody loved the auto-tune, not everybody loved the like 80s sounds, the synthiness of 808s and Heartbreak, that he was singing more than he was rapping. As much as that album is lauded to this day, or as much as that album's lauded now, it wasn't back then. It was controversial. And Kanye had that kind of dealing with his first like loss in terms of not being overwhelmingly beloved by everyone.
Right.
And then the Taylor Swift incident happened like a year later. And suddenly he was vilified. He was the bane of America. Like, nobody liked him. Obama called him a jackass.
Yeah.
Like, Lady Gaga killed their Fame Kills tour that they were going to go on together, which had already sold out, I do believe. Like, she ended an entire tour that was sold out and returned all that money because she just didn't want to interact with Kanye. There was serious talk that his career was done, that nobody was going to work with him ever again, that the industry wasn't going to let him back in. And he spent, 6 months, the next 6 to 8 months traveling, going from America to Paris, Japan, Italy. He interned at Fendi with Virgil Abloh for a little bit, and he was kind of like off on an adventure, really diving into fashion, but also starting to work on music. And then for a lot of 2010 was focused on this album, being in Hawaii, putting this together. So he was in America since he was in Hawaii, but not quite, right?
Right.
He was outside the continental United States, but he definitely had this sense of this album was going to either win him favor again and be the thing that brought him back into pop culture, that brought him back into the industry, because as he said, it would remind people of what he's capable of, or it would be the last album of his career. And you really get that sense that he truly believed and felt that he was rising from the ashes and that he was a guilty man ready to be judged. And either people were going to forgive him or they were going to like say off with his head.
Right. And him putting himself like essentially in the same level as Jesus, like Jesus died for something like great, like, you know, died for our sins, like did something selfless. And I wonder if that's the way Kanye's like kind of painting himself. Like, I should have run up on stage and done that. Like, I did the right thing.
You have to wonder, because we do know that even though he apologized in 2009, by like 2010 and the years that followed,
he's walking it back.
Yeah, he's just like, nah, I don't regret anything I've ever done.
Doesn't he say he apologizes for the apology? Like,
yeah,
the only thing he regrets is that he said he apologizes.
Yeah. Like, wow. Okay. So he played humble.
To the end.
Yep. So we have that as kind of a setup, is this sense that Kanye really does feel this burden of judgment and this sense that he's rising from the ashes. And it makes sense in the context of the Runaway movie, too, where you see Kanye living his ordinary life. He's just driving in his car in the woods and a meteor crashes, that ends up being the Phoenix. And phoenixes literally rise from ashes, which it makes sense why he would use Lacrimosa there.
Right.
But there's also a lot of talk of what the Phoenix represents in the Runaway movie, as we see her head into Kanye's superficial world and not fit in. And she ends up giving him a lecture at one point about, or he gives her a lecture. No, one of them gives the other one a lecture about turning to stone.
Yeah, that's the Phoenix.
The Phoenix, okay. And how like you can lose your fire and it's artists that turn to stone, et cetera, and then she flies away at the end of the day. And we've talked in analysis that we've done of the movie that the Phoenix, as with most Kanye things, represents another aspect of Kanye.
Yes.
Or his relationship with fame, with art, with artistry, that she ends up being more of a mirror. And so that would apply here as well. Like, the same way that she can't survive in the world that he's living in, that's representative of the fact that there's part of Kanye that feels like he can't survive in the world that he's living in.
Yeah. It's just crazy that Lacrimosa seems to kind of set up a lot of what you just said, and like setting up the grand ethereal sense here. And even if the beginning of Dark Fantasy, like if that's not Lacrimosa all warped and everything, like it's still cool. I mean, we get the Runaway Movie, which puts the two sounds next to each other, so we at least get that. And with that in mind, like it's cool. I feel like it does carry the energy of Lacrimosa, but it's a much more modern take on that kind of Baroque sound. It's electronic and stretched out, and the end result is this beautifully melodic and trancing sound that gives this album the sort of big introduction it deserves. Like it really does feel like a modern fairy tale in that way. Like it's going to adhere to the traditional dark, tragic nature of fairy tales, but in this 21st century kind of way.
Yep. Very well said. It. And then we get Nicki coming in.
Ooh, Nicki Minaj.
Yeah, so this was my first introduction to Nicki.
I didn't know about
Monster, but...
Oh, well, yeah. But I hadn't seen the Cypher with her before this, so this was my first introduction too.
Yeah. So you have Nicki coming in. I think her album release the same day as Twisted Fantasy?
Pink Friday?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I don't know. Let's see. Release date. November 22nd, 2010.
That's it.
Yeah, there you go. Wow. Cool.
Where are we at?
You can peep the scene.
Yeah, sorry. I saw someone on Twitter say Boo posted a video on Insta with Kanye. And I was like, what? And I just checked, and it was just a video of like Kanye in the studio with Tyler.
Oh, okay. Is that an old video?
It's an old video, but why is he posting it now, you know?
Well, let's speculate after the episode.
After the episode. Focus, Chris. Focus. So Nicki Minaj comes in with this intro that is it's derived from, it is derived from Cinderella by Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl is one of the most famous writers, I guess, of the 20th century, writing a ton of like fantasy style stuff that was for young adults. And he did a twist on fairy tales, like classic fairy tales, that he called Revolting Rhymes. And you can see in the bio, Roald Dahl was a spy, ace fighter pilot, chocolate historian, and medical inventor. He was also the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, and many more brilliant stories. He remains the world's #1 storyteller. So he does his take on Cinderella, but giving it a little darker of an edge. And it starts in a way that darkens what Disney had already kind of, well, maybe Disney had it, but a fairy tale that was kind of charming at that point. And it goes, I guess you think you know this story. You don't. The real one's much more gory. The phony one, the one you know, was cooked up years and years ago and made to sound all soft and sappy just to keep the children happy. Mind you, they got the first bite, or the first bit right, the bit where in the dead of night the ugly sisters Jules and Ball departed for the palace while darling little Cinderella was locked up in a slimy cellar. The story goes that the prince then kills the sisters and Cinderella is horrified. And instead of like falling in love with the prince and living happily ever after, she asks her fairy godmother to just give her a nice normal man. And instead of settling down as a princess, she just settles down with like a guy that is normal and makes her happy, and she lives an average life and is happy with that.
And he makes jam, so I would have married that guy too.
Yeah, jam is delicious. Like jam is very nice.
Strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, I'll take it all.
I prefer strawberry and blueberry.
Yeah. You don't like raspberry? I think raspberry might be my fave.
Raspberry's great. I just, if I had the option of the three, I'd go with the other two before raspberry.
My mom started making this like pepper jelly a few years ago. She'll make like jalapeno raspberry, like habanero apricot. That shit, I ain't afraid to say, like, it's the best jam I've ever had. And I can't believe my mom is able to do something like that.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, and I constantly get supply of it.
Yeah, I need to come back to Chicago just to have some toast with that on it.
If you show up at my house, spring, summer, fall, like there's jam studying around and you'll get some of it.
Not winter?
She's probably given it all away by then.
Okay. So, I know when I need to make my journey to Chicago.
It just gives it away. It doesn't even sell it.
Amazing.
I know.
Well, good. It's all the better for me.
So basically, I relate to what Cinderella did.
Okay. Makes sense. I would too then. But you're seeing that there is like murder in a story where murder did not take place. There's like twists on it. So like already we're getting this shift in a fairy tale that we know where it is darker and it's twisted from like the familiar and going into something different, which is perfect for what Kanye is doing with his story. It's not just I've achieved success and look at this awesome lifestyle I'm living. He starts to show how this fairy tale that many rappers have portrayed over the course of hip hop history has now become something that's like far like darker and uglier than what you had heard before.
It's awful blasted boring.
Yeah. I love that. So yeah, Nicki's version coming in with like, you might think you've peeped the scene, you haven't, the real one's far too mean. So she's like even updating Roald Dahl's version and making it a little more palatable for 2010 life and hip hop in general. The watered down one, the one was made up centuries ago. They made it sound all whack and corny, and yes, it's awful blasted boring. Twisted fictions, sick addiction. Will gather round, children, zip it, listen. And I think those like that one line, twisted fictions and sick addiction, kind of get at some of the core of this album, where we're about to hear like stories that are twisted. So it's Kanye's life, but a fictionalized version of Kanye's life, but it's also dealing with like addictions that he's facing now because he's famous. So you're really getting this idea of like the unreality that was talked about at the end of 808s and Heartbreak, with this addiction to fame and consumerism that Kanye hinted at on All Falls Down, and then really gets into as well on Yeezus and The Life of Pablo.
Yeah. There's something so powerful about setting up the album this way. Like, maybe this is obvious and like a simple way to look at it, but like he's telling you right here, like, this story you're about to hear is terrible. Like, this guy's life isn't awesome. It's full of fictions and sick addiction. Like, this whole world is bullshit. It's acknowledging all that before it goes into the journey that you're about to hear. So it's like priming you and letting you know, like, okay, like, yeah, a lot of this is exaggerated. Like, we're not supposed to just see this guy's life as awesome. But then later on in the album, there are these very real sad things happening. So like, yeah, all of the kind of extra moments and like power monster, like, yeah, we know we're primed to think like, okay, this is like extra and over the top. But there are a lot of moments in the album that aren't, that feel really familiar and normal. And it really paints Kanye's life in that way as something that's, I don't know, it really, you start here where it's like this big, like gaping look at everything and like primes you for the extraness, but then you're kind of pulled into the normalcy of Kanye's life and like the loneliness. And it's such an interesting way to do this, because on an album like Graduation, you don't get something like this from Nicki Minaj. Like, you're not told that, like, okay, like when you hear Drunken Hot Girls, like it's actually kind of sad and you're not supposed to be rooting for this guy and think his life is awesome. Yeah. But and then you get a song like Homecoming, like which actually is sad. You see him removed. Like, it's interesting though here, like by having this kind of setup, it really forces you to recognize how real moments like Runaway are and Hell of a Life and Blame Game, where like, ooh, like, yeah, like Kanye's big celebrity life like is like this thing that deserves a fairy tale, but within that we have these sad looks at his actual life.
Yeah, like sometimes fiction is the best way to get at truth. Mm-hmm. Like, to distort reality is actually the clearest way to see something real.
Right.
And I feel like that's a lot of what happens on this. Like, as much as people were attached to the emotion of 808s and heartbreak, I think there really is like a stronger sense of how lost Kanye is that comes through on something like Runaway and Blame Game, because of just how over the top these things are. It really allows Kanye to emote in a way that was far more subtle on 808s.
Right. Totally.
Okay. So do we start getting into the chorus?
Oh, man. Yeah, this is cool. Like you have all the, the distorted sounds, like the choir in the background. And then like the piano kicks off like the normal kind of soundscape that we get from Kanye. Like it starts off pretty spacious and hypnotic and goes to something like grander and telling. Like this is what starts to feel like the overture portion that's setting up the fairy tale at hand. And you have those strings below that are like dun 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 dun. Like it just has this feel of like, oh man, we're about to enter something epic, and it's cool.
Yeah, and doesn't like a lot of the production kind of fall away when we get that, like if it's Justin Vernon or if it's like Mike Oldfield or John Anderson going like, can we get much higher?
Yeah, at one point it goes away, which is a cool part of this. I was going to mention it. I didn't know where to do it, but there's like a motif in the song of like, it feels like the song's about to take off and then it doesn't, which is something we saw happen a lot on 808s, or there are a lot of these sounds that like start up but never finish, like a lot of chords that aren't resolved. It's just a cool part of the song that like that there are a lot of moments where the sound completely dips out and it feels like it's just kind of trotting along and it never launches into the stratosphere like you expect it to.
Which is different than something like, I think to give people a comparison would be like Liftoff, where like Liftoff is, and I'm not trying to like, I bash Liftoff a lot, but Liftoff is very soaring the entire time. It feels like it is trying to like maintain this sense of elevation and this sense of epicness and scale in a lot of the instrumentation. And I feel like here you're getting that at times, but as you're saying, there are like these dips in and out. There's like the like growing sense of elevation, but then it pulls itself back in. There's just something that feels like a little more stop and go.
And that the power of that is enhanced by the fact that the music is so grandiose and like it feels like a full orchestra. Like you've got all of these sounds going at once. It feels like a song that should be taking off, and it feels like it's starting to but never does. Like the fact that it's doing that is even more, it just puts you on like you can't get your footing with it.
Yeah, it's got that nice duality to it, like the tension between the highs and the lows that it stops and starts.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, and then we have our first, I guess, lyrical reference, if you don't count the Roald Dahl. It just kicks us off right away with the Can We Get Much Higher, which is a twist on In High Places by Mike Oldfield featuring John Anderson.
And this is an actual sample. It's not just an interpolation.
Is it? Because I know in like the song it says, could we get much higher? But in Dark Fantasy, is it saying, can we get much higher?
Well, in the actual song Dark Fantasy, it sounds like John Anderson to me.
Okay, yeah, and they say later on. So the first chorus is, can we get much higher? Then the second chorus is, can we get much higher? That makes sense. Right. That makes sense. Okay. Yeah, Genius thinks it's Justin Vernon that's singing it, but
yeah, that was a little, I wasn't sure what they meant by that, because what Genius does is like the parts that are Justin Vernon are just straight text, and the parts that are Tiana Taylor are italicized. So the straight text you assume is all Justin Vernon, but I think it's just the O that's supposed to be Justin Vernon.
Okay, then can we get much higher is the actual sampled,
because the O has that Bon Iver like, warped sound, and then you can clearly hear Tiana Taylor, and then Can We Get Much Higher is just like the actual vocals from the song.
Okay. Which the song, like, I thought was pretty catchy. Like, I
love it.
Added it to a playlist. I never listened to the full thing. I was just like, I need to keep listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, I know John Anderson because he's the lead singer of Yes. Like, I know him, but I don't really know Mike Oldfield. It's probably because he's not. He's just an instrumentalist. Like, all of his albums feature singers. So here it's a Mike Oldfield song, but really it's a John Anderson song.
Okay. So the first verse, you know how we do. If this is your first episode, our hypothesis is that Kanye uses samples to reinforce what's happening on the song. So it's not just for aesthetic purposes. It's not just because the sample sounds good, but because what's actually happening in that song and the themes of that song, the meaning of that song, in some way reinforces by either comparing or contrasting to what Kanye is talking about. Mm-hmm. And you can see that kind of already with "Look down from in high places, lift off the ground without a sound, yeah, we move through open spaces. The wind it pulls, the sky gets close." So in this first verse, it's essentially like we're taking off the ground. We're leaving the earth behind. We're moving up into the sky, and like we're getting higher. And that's when the chorus comes in. Could we get much higher? Could we get much higher? Navigator to heaven. So it's almost like they're actually heading off into heaven, which we know Kanye is really dealing with fame, and this idea of his journey so far in his discography was going from just a kid in Chicago waiting for his spaceship to take him away and take him off into outer space where he could touch the sky and become this famous rapper and musician, which he ended up doing. But now that he has ascended to that place, he's starting to have some regrets, which is what Graduation and 808s and Heartbreak were about. And you get to verse 2 on in high places. Check out, did you check your heart? This cloudless blue, this starless night, shoot out into the shining, that devil moon, he sings of love, yeah. Can we get much higher? Can we get much higher? Navigator to heaven. And then the third verse, the stars so close we touch them, they seem so small. They make me wonder, far out in formation, 5,000 moons, floating balloons. Could it get much higher? Could it get much higher? Navigator to heaven. So I think the main conveyance here is that you leave behind what you know, you head off into this new world, and the stars that like are so close now also start to seem so small. And you're just kind of left in this new place wondering what it's all about, not necessarily like overwhelmed or transcended. And you even have like the implications of a devil moon around, and it just starts to get into this idea of no longer being grounded, no longer being on earth, which I think this song in particular really sets up. Like, you are starting to head into a fantasy world. You are no longer in the Chicago that you used to be. You are no longer the Kanye that you used to be. You're off someplace else, and you're starting to take stock of what it means to no longer be on the ground.
Yeah, which is a much more like whimsical, naive look at maybe not naive, but like a heartening view of it, like this nice way of looking at like you being up near the stars and like you're seeing everything for as they are, and you there's this kind of understanding of what fame is, I think, in this, and like all the things you could achieve with it, which is then going to be contrasted by everything you hear in this album.
Yeah, right. Did Kanye have a line about like shoot for the moon, land in the stars?
Sounds right. Are you thinking of Liftoff again?
Am I?
I don't know. Sounds liftoffy.
Oh yeah, reach for the stars. So if you fall, you land on a cloud. Jump in the crowd, spark your light. Homecoming. Yeah, nice little resonance, but you at least get the idea of like ascension, right? Like, yes. Kanye has ascended to this place, and the same way that song ends with "Could it get much higher?" Kanye, through the vocals of John Anderson and having Vernon Taylor back him up, saying, can we get much higher? Like, is it possible to get higher than where I am in terms of like superstar status? Which, right. You know, somebody coming off of like the Taylor Swift incident and the fallout, it is a bold way to start the album in a sense. Like, can we get much higher? Like, can we?
It's just so, again, it's just so heavily contrasts what John Anderson is doing, which is much more like musing and contemplative. Like, it's really thinking about being in this kind of high status, where all Kanye can think about is like, can I get higher than this? Like, how much higher can I go? Because I would like to go higher.
It feels bragging, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, it's not contemplative. It's like, can we get much higher? Like, fuck you, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Which also, though, it does like recall Yeezus and like New Slaves, and the fact that he retreats into at the end of New Slaves, when he fails to mobilize a revolution, he just falls to like getting high again, so high, and like falling back into like drugs and a ridiculous lifestyle. And we know that this song also ends with but after that took pills, kissed an heiress, and woke up back in Paris. So there is this idea of like kind of getting high. So it feels bragging, but it also starts to feel like somebody that's kind of like high having these like musings.
Yeah, right. I like that.
So first verse. Yeah. I fantasize about this back in Chicago. Mercy, mercy me, that Murcielago. Which, okay.
Oh, man.
We already have another like reference interpolation going on. Like, so you have a contrast just in what Kanye's saying, right? I fantasize about this back in Chicago. So you recall like young Kanye, drive slow Kanye, spaceship Kanye, we don't care Kanye, all falls down Kanye, heard him say Kanye. And what's he like fantasizing about? Like that Murcielago, the Lamborghini, having the nice car, like having this lifestyle that he's going to go on to kind of describe through the rest of the verse. Like his dreams in Chicago came true, which also just grounds us in everything that we've been saying. Like this was a fantasy he had when he was young, and now it's his reality, but the fantasy's been like become darker and twisted. It's no longer what he hoped for, which is essentially saying, go back and listen to College Dropout and Late Registration. And you can hear like the dreams I had, and like wait till you get a load of what's to come. But the Mercy, Mercy Me, that Murcielago, Marvin Gaye has a song, Mercy, Mercy Me. Look at that.
Yeah.
It's a 1971 song, and it starts in the first verse, Mercy, Mercy Me. Things ain't what they used to be. No, no. So already you're getting this idea of reflection, right? Things ain't what they used to be, which recalls I fantasized about this back in Chicago, and lo and behold, things aren't what they used to be. Like I was kind of broke then, and now I have this Murcielago. But in Marvin Gaye's song, he uses the structure for each verse, the Mercy, Mercy Me, things ain't what they used to be, but then hits it with this negative about Earth. The song's subtitle is The Ecology, so it's getting into this idea that people are ruining the planet. So where did all the blue skies go? Poison is the wind that blows from the north and south and east. Kanye West.
West is nowhere to be found.
West is nowhere to be found. Just right there off the bat, you have like things ain't what they used to be. Where did all the blue skies go? In a song where it's like, can we get much higher? And remember that in high places, they even talk about like the blue sky before you start getting into outer space. So, but in this, it's like, I saw blue skies, but now they're gone because there's poison on the wind that blows. Like the atmosphere is being ruined. And that's kind of the tone of this Marvin Gaye song. Mercy, mercy me, things ain't what they used to be. Oil wasted on the ocean and upon our seas, fish full of mercury, radiation underground and in the sky, animals and birds who live nearby are dying. What about this overcrowded land? How much more abuse from man can she stand? Like, already... You think about how that applies to Kanye's life at this point, his relationship with fame, what he talked about on 808s and Heartbreak, the pain he felt in the aftermath of the Taylor Swift interruption and how it felt like the whole country hated him. The idea that there's radiation in the sky that's killing the birds, and Kanye's talking about like getting much higher, and then the fact that it's essentially saying that like the land is being abused and dying, and Kanye ends this album with "Who Will Survive in America," where he's talking about like society essentially like causing so many complications that it's driving people to like madness, to insanity, to losing themselves. Like this whole album ends up being like a huge critique of American culture and society, and the way that fame and our relationship with fame and the relationship to celebrities is so toxic. And so it's not quite as like ecologically focused as Marvin Gaye's song, the same way that Blood on the Leaves isn't so civil rights focused
Right.
as the original sample used there. But Kanye is taking those songs and applying them to what he's seeing with 21st century like lifestyle and the relationship that people have to American culture. And you get all of that just in this idea of Kanye like fantasizing about having a Lamborghini, but it's
Yeah.
the implications of what it means to now be that famous and to have the Lamborghini, and like the pitfalls that are going to start to ruin his life.
Yeah. Like it's just such incredible narrative and character work. And maybe, you know, maybe there are some people out there who are just rolling their eyes at everything Chris just said. Like that's the level we like to be on. Like we like to think of like, what is Kanye setting up? Like what do we see later happening in the narrative that like crystallizes a moment like this? Because it is like he says "Mercy, mercy me," which is a clear allusion to Marvin Gaye, that Murcielago, which seems completely counter to what Marvin Gaye is talking about. It just like this whole going beyond though, like the bigger implications of that, like what he's doing here, like the character setup that's happening here, like on a plain level, is just such genius. It reminds me of what a more of a movie would do, where a good character introduction isn't just, you know, like, oh, here's the journey you're going to see the person go on, like laid out in text form, like in dialogue or something. Like there's, you like the tone of a shot, the movement of what's happening, the things that are surrounding the character, the colors, the vision, like it's all part of building that character. Like that's all, they're all these visual cues. And I feel like that's what Kanye's doing in a sonic sense here, and the way it's describing the character. Because up until this point, up until Kanye's verse, which we get a whole minute and 8 seconds of music. Like there's this huge grand intro before we even hear Kanye. Before he comes in, he's like, yeah, just like I'm the shit. Like all the groundwork being laid is so cool. Like as we talked about, like, it feels like the music is building and building. Like you expect it to like climax and for it to be resolved, but it just kind of pulls back, and we like go from the sky level view like down to Kanye at the ground, and it's just walking and he's the shit. Yeah. And like their pianos, keyboards, synthesizers, like they're all there, but like none of them are overshadowing each other. Like they all kind of like just resting in the background. And Kanye is the one keeping the beat by saying, yeah. Like he's controlling the momentum. It's just so cool that like we're getting this image of him and like this suave, like egotistical feel mixed in with like, that's how we're introduced to him. And then Mercy, Mercy Me, Murcielago, like that's how we then roll into this character, like somebody who is just completely ignoring what Mercy, Mercy Me is all about. And he's like, nah, just give me the Murcielago. That's the first year that I blow. Like the man, it's just such good work to present a character like this, who like in the opening seconds you're like, oh, I understand this guy completely.
There's something like you're talking about how the instrumentals kind of pull back. Kanye's delivery is very, I think in a lot of ways, like toned down from where it is in the rest of the album, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's something about how he's rapping on Dark Fantasy and Gorgeous, and to some degrees on Power too, that feels much more grounded and reserved and thoughtful, to where like when you finally get to Monster and So Appalled and Devil in a New Dress, it just feels more of that like fantasy character kind of taking over. But I always thought that there was something very purposeful in kind of the sleepy delivery that he has
Yeah.
in this song, despite talking about how like awesome he is. There's something just like a little like bored of it.
Yeah. It's a very like musical verse from him. Like the first hit that I go, like he's just like, he's kind of bopping along. It's like, it's not a traditional rap verse per se. It's kind of just him like, yeah, it's kind of like easygoing. I feel like that's what you're describing. Like he's just like, he's so confident that he's just going to rap this verse and he knows how awesome it is.
And then you compare that to like All of the Lights and Monster and So Appalled, and it's just like two completely different tones.
Where you can like sense the pain and the fear and everything.
Or just like a Monster, like the ego and like
Right.
the aggression and like the elevation. Like this is
Right.
him like driving to the club and just like thinking quietly to himself, where like Monster is him in the club.
Right. I guess that's what I kind of meant was that Monster, he's putting on a front. He feels the need to act that way because his life is actually shitty. But here he's just like, man, it's awesome.
Yeah, like he's very like satiated in a way.
Yes. Right.
But
which is typical for like an ordinary world scenario. Like we always bring up Billy Madison. Yeah. Billy Madison's life is awesome at the beginning of the movie because he just gets drunk all day and does whatever he wants.
Yeah, and he's not thinking, he's like pushing away the negative thoughts by doing that.
Yeah.
So he's like completely content with his life, but we know that he's not.
Right.
And that's the thing that he has to like start to tackle over the course of the film and finally accept and grow beyond. Same kind of thing with like Aladdin. Like Aladdin's just kind of living his life, and he seems like happy being a street rat, but you know he's not happy being a street rat, and that he like yearns for more.
To be a prince.
He wants to be a prince. Okay, so Mercy Mercy Me, that Murcielago, that's me the first year that I blow. I imagine it's just like, you know, when I first blew up, I went and got like a Lamborghini. Like, you know, that's and then how you say broke in Spanish, mi no hablo, which like I don't speak Spanish. It'd almost be like, you know, how you say broke in Spanish, mi no hablo español, is essentially what he's like saying. I don't even know how to say broke in Spanish because I'm so rich.
It's cool. Like, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go.
Well, I was just gonna, one thing I just wanted to note was, yeah, this isn't really the kind of verse we've ever got from Kanye. Like he's always been egotistical and like believed in himself, but it's always come with that though. Like I really believe I can do something that's supposed to be encouraging and inspiring to you. But this is more like, man, I'm just so great. You'll never understand because you don't live the kind of life I do. But a moment like, but at the same time, like the way, like his references and the way he speaks about things, like do have an early Kanye feel. Like that line, how you say broke in Spanish, me no hablo, like definitely recalls like him, you know, kind of poking at the education system and like it doesn't matter if like they call you dumb, like it does, like I feel like he's alluding to that, and just like the playfulness of this verse, like we haven't gotten this from him in quite some time. Like I'm thinking like the beginning of Graduation is the last time we heard him speak like this.
Yeah, there's something a little silly about it that recalls, you know, we don't care.
Right.
Even some of the like the rhymes on All Falls Down or Get 'em High, like New Workout Plan. You think Late Registration tends to be a little more polished and serious than College Dropout was. And you have some funny lines on Graduation, like D's, motherfucker, D's, Rosie Perez.
Right, stuff like that.
But I don't know. This is just like a little goofier, right?
Yeah, it's just very playful, which is again like a very interesting way to introduce your character. Like he is both this egotistical guy, but also somebody who just like jokes around and is like go with the flow.
Yeah, and the fact that he says like how you say broken Spanish, it says broken Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's like broke IN, but could also be broke EN, like the word broken. And then he goes on to say, you know, hablo, I don't speak, but doesn't finish the sentence with español. And then says, me drown sorrow in that Diablo. So now he's using broken English.
Yeah.
Or I guess you could say like me he's still using mi, so like I drown sorrow in
Right.
that Diablo, so he's speaking like a mix of English, Spanish, Spanglish, broken Spanish. So I drown sorrow in that Diablo, which is another type of Lamborghini. So not only does he
Yes.
have a Murcielago, he has a Diablo, a Lamborghini Diablo, but also it's a play on the idea that like he's doing devilish things.
Yes.
Right. He's indulging in sin. He's indulging in like sex, drugs, rock and roll. And
Oh
this
my
is in
God,
the
yeah.
aftermath of 808s and Heartbreak, where he was talking about like, there's no YSL I can not sell. What is it?
Goodbye.
Yeah, no YSL I can buy, no Gucci, like no Louis Vuitton to put on,
Yeah.
that can like save him from the pain he's feeling. So he's just saying, yeah, I drown my sorrow in like devilish things.
Yeah. It's funny because, yeah, you're right. On Pinocchio's story, he's wailing and pleading for you to understand him. And here he's just like, shit, like if my life's going to be like this, like I'll lean into it. Like I know I'm going to be sorrowful, but I'll just buy a Lamborghini and cover it up
Yep.
because I can.
And what all falls down, like the things we buy to cover up what's inside.
Right. Yeah.
We keep bringing up that line like every episode, but and then me found bravery in my bravado. So yeah, like I found bravery in my bravado. So by just being as like by being as bravado as I am, no, by having the bravado that Kanye has, he's finding this sense of bravery that allows him to express himself, that allows him to be who he is. So it's almost,
Yeah.
I think that ties into a lot of what he was talking about in 2018. Like he was saying that he started to feel so timid, and that's why he put on the red hat, and that's why he started tweeting the things he was tweeting, is because he needed to start feeling like Kanye West again. And it's not that he put on the red hat because he was brave and wanted to speak out. It's he put on the red hat because it was an act of bravado, and doubling down on something like that and trying to change people's views on it, getting the heat from it. As he says in Kids See Ghosts, like, I want all the smoke. That's where he discovers his bravery. And
Yes.
I mean, this line feels very, I loved it when I first heard it and love it to this day, but now it feels more important in terms of like contextualizing
Yeah.
Kanye in the aftermath of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
You're totally right because, I mean, as we said, up to this point, a lot of Kanye's language on his first 3 albums are like, I can inspire you to do great things. And everybody would find bravery in his bravado. But this line is very self-focused. And that's now the period of Kanye we're entering where like he's just thinking about himself and like trying to fix himself, which he needs to do. But then, what you're discussing and like with the way he's been the last few years, like he's kind of found this mix of both. He needs to both like be inspiring and be a leader to people, but also he needs to be attentive to himself and his mental health, and he needs to take care of himself. And it's funny that this line is kind of like a bridge to that. Like in order for him to get to a healthy place, he had to do something like really unhealthy and indulgent like this. Like he really needed to lean into this lifestyle to realize how it wasn't right for him, and now he needed to graduate to something better and healthier.
Yeah, but it's a long road to that point.
Sure is. About 6, 7, 8 years.
No big deal.
Yeah.
Then we get DJs need to listen to the models. You ain't got no fucking Yeezy in your Serato. So Serato, I guess, is DJ equipment where they store digital files for all the musicians that they're going to play.
Right.
So it's like, oh, what's in your Serato? And you can kind of like show them like it's your collection of Pokemon or Magic cards. And you're like,
So this
"Oh,
is Chris's Serato.
yeah, you don't have a Black Lotus in your Serato? Like you don't have a Birds of Paradise? You don't have what's a Pokemon? You don't have a
Pygmalion?
Gyarados? Yeah, or that. So yeah, you don't have any Yeezy in your Serato? Like, stupid. And then you have Amber Rose coming in like, you ain't got no Yeezy? I like that moment because it's saying like DJs need to listen to the models, and then Amber Rose is in a sense playing the model.
Right.
It's like incensed that there's no Kanye that the DJ will play. Like, yeah, you need to play DJ in the clubs, or you need to play Kanye in the clubs, which might be another like post Taylor Swift interruption call out. I don't know.
Yeah. But I guess what I like is, again, further distancing himself from the old Kanye. Like, it's not the people who need Kanye's music, it's the models in Kanye's life that need his music. Like, he went from Graduation, which was like this story that was meant to paint celebrity in a bad way, and like ooh, this life Kanye's entering, like, it's icky and not good. But after like the heartbreak of 808s and Heartbreak and him losing everyone in his life, like, this is kind of all he has left. Like, he just needs these models in his life now.
Yeah, right. Like, I do like that. It also calls back in some ways to Jesus Walks. Like, you talk about Jesus, your record won't get played. And Kanye's at a point where like DJs aren't playing his record, and he's kind of annoyed by it. And it's not just because he talked about Jesus, but because of like everything else that he has.
That's an interesting part of this too, is how badly Kanye wanted to be played in the radio, and it kind of started his whole thing of like Drake and just being jealous in general of people who were finding success. He's now making music that doesn't really get radio play. Like, he's making these grand, adored, timeless things that belong in museums and not really on the radio, but he's still struggling with the fact that like he's not that guy anymore.
Yeah, which, for context, for anybody that doesn't know the Drake reference, it was in 2018 when Kanye did his interview with Charlemagne the God. It was like a 2-hour interview, and he talks at one point about feeling jealousy towards Drake because Kanye was putting out albums,
right,
and songs weren't on the radio as much as he expected them to be, while Drake was having all these songs on the radio. And Kanye's just like, why is he getting all the radio play and I'm not? Which was kind of shocking to us at the time, because we thought that Kanye would be like, well aware of why something like New Slaves might not be getting radio play, or why something like Blood on the Leaves might not be getting radio play, or even like a lot of The Life of Pablo. Like, as you said, he's making these timeless things, but they don't necessarily have the structure of radio songs.
Right. Although Dark Fantasy did make it to number 60 on the Billboard charts.
Which is crazy, because I don't think of this as a radio song either.
No, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it gets played on the radio, but I did think that was interesting because it's not a single or anything.
Yeah, that's true.
The only non-single on the album to actually make the charts.
Was it Runaway did pretty well on the charts, right?
But it was a single.
It was a single, but I was just, they did like a truncated radio version of it.
Oh, right, yeah.
We'll see how Hurricane does, if Hurricane ever releases.
Yeah, you got The Weeknd on your side, you've got a shot.
So what? That's Serato. Stupid, but what the hell do I know? Like, yeah, what do I know about like making music that people enjoy? You know?
I say that line all the time.
Do you?
All the time. Stupid. What the hell do I know?
It's just a little bit of like false humility. Like, you know, he feels he knows.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just a Chi-Town guy with a Nas flow. So that brings us to our next reference.
Here we go.
Which, he's like, what the hell do I know? You know, I'm just a Chi-Town guy with a Nas flow. Like, just so a Nas flow. Okay, 2007. Common did an album called Finding Forever, which Kanye featured on several times and produced on. And one of the songs they did together was called Southside. And Kanye has the intro like la la la, and everybody say la la la, I know, I know. And in his first verse, he talks about like, I know you thinking it must be Armor All flow because it never get rusty. I ain't got to say it, man, dog, trust me. Bust somebody head, GLC, where was he? Still rock the Prada, for that, rock the Starter. Guys had the Georgetown, the Magic way harder. Thinking back to the projects and the way they tore them all up. Like when I do a project and come back and tear them all up. So just bragging about like having a great flow, being from Chicago, like being great. And you get the chorus, like we coming from the South side, South side, South side, side of the Chi. So very grounded in Chicago. Then you get Common coming in the second verse saying, the broads, the cars, the half moons, the stars. Ooh. Moons and stars, you don't say. I'm like Jeff Fort the way I get behind bars. Burn CDs with no regard for the stars. I love that line. Come to the crib with conflict diamonds and they ours. Which, what a way to say I don't care about anything you said on Diamonds from Sierra Leone, Kanye.
Yeah.
Back in 94, they called me Chi-Town's Nas. Okay. Now them guys know I'm one of Chi-Town's gods. So you get this idea of back in the day, they said I had a flow like Nas, and now I'm one of Chi-Town's gods. And we have Kanye at the start of this verse saying, like, I fantasized about this back in Chicago. So he too is calling back to like a time before and then the present day and contrasting then to now, which also, like, as we said, calls back is what Marvin Gaye is doing, saying things ain't the way that they used to be. So you can kind of start to make this connection that Kanye at this point is starting to assume the Common attitude, or like he's on the level of Common, where in 2007 he's not saying any of the lines like Common is in terms of like I'm Chi-Town's god, like I have a Nas flow, but now he's the one saying like I have the Nas flow. And I think inherent to that is the following line, like I'm one of Chi-Town's gods.
Yeah.
Especially as he starts to get into like the next verse saying he's like a king, and just the ego that he has throughout this song. It just kind of feels like a little bit of a shout out to his mentor, but also him feeling like he is graduated to that level of like, yeah, I'm a Chi-Town god.
Which is huge because before this, Kanye always bowed to people like this. Like, obviously, on his first two records, he's just like in awe that like Talib and Common and Jay, like I got all these guys on my record. Oh my God.
Yeah.
But now he's gotten to this point where, and even in Graduation, where he's like regretful that he did something to Jay, his mentor. Now he's like, I am on Common's level. Like I do have a Nas flow. Like I am now as important to Chicago as Common has ever been. And even if Kanye doesn't really mean it, although he probably does, it's a great way of setting up this character. Once again, like this is not the Kanye you knew. Like he is somebody who now thinks of himself as very important to an entire community, to all of hip hop.
And well said. And one of the like bonus moments we found in the song comes with the verse 5. Mm-hmm. And we're currently in the period of Kanye wearing the mask, living in Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and people have made jokes about it being like Phantom of the Opera. Mm-hmm. And if you go back to our Graduation season, we talked about, what was it? It was Phantom of the Paradise. Phantom of the Paradise, which was something that, who was it?
Brian De Palma.
Daft Punk.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah, that like Daft Punk had referenced at one point, and that we thought that Kanye might have like some kind of reference or feeling the energy from a Phantom of the Paradise, and just wondering about like, oh, Kanye and Phantom of the Opera, is there anything there? And here in this fifth verse from Southside, we have Kanye saying, with guys masked up like Phantom of the Opera, dreaming of the day they push a phantom to the operas.
Yeah.
Can't wait till they say, yeah, Ye ran up at the Oscars. Papa, I heard his life is like a movie. Man. He did, shortly after this, run up at the MTV Video Awards. But, you know, Kanye's very well aware of masks and Phantom of the Opera.
Yeah. I mean, his story so cleanly mirrors what happened. But, yeah. Anyway, I love that part of Kanye's. It just seems to be such a motif for him.
Yeah, right. And that he like seems to have these references back in older songs that you can connect to things that he's doing now and be like, oh.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so am I chicken that knew Phoebe Philo, which Phoebe Philo was head of Celine at that time, creative director of the French women's brand Celine. And Kanye famously at the Coachella performance wore that Celine blouse.
Right.
But he's just saying he bought his like chick a fancy like designer clothing, and in return he got so much head. I woke up to Sleepy Hollow, which
great line.
We were banging our heads over like the implications of this line. So, okay. The idea that he's just like, I mean, this is also how On Sight ends, right? Like,
right.
The girl gets kicked out of the club and he gets her back in. He's like, I put my dick in her mouth, like On Sight. And now here he's ending this verse with like, so much head I woke up at Sleepy Hollow, or to Sleepy Hollow. But Sleepy Hollow is another fairy tale. And the story goes that Ichabod Crane, as we were talking about earlier, schoolmaster in this small like town called Sleepy Hollow. And he's really nice, charming, like the women love him, and he has his eyes in particular on this wealthy guy's daughter. And he's trying to woo her because he fancies like inheriting what her father has. So even though he's this like nice guy, there's also this underlying greed that he possesses, and he's combated with this other guy for the girl's favor. And Ichabod Crane is a little bit of an outsider. He's from New York, where the other guy is one of like the local boys that is a little arrogant, maybe a little Gaston-y from Beauty and the Beast, but also people like since he's, you know, one of them. Mm-hmm. And Ichabod one night at this party proposes to the girl, and she turns him down. And he's broken up about it, but he's also been in like increasing tensions with the other guy. And as Ichabod's riding home, he passes what he believes to be this headless horseman. And over the course of the story, you're hearing all these tales of fantastic like ghosts and spirits, and Ichabod Crane is really into that stuff and believing in witchcraft. And one of the legends is this dead Hessian soldier that carries his head around. So Ichabod, in this midst of being like unhappy and broken up, envisions seeing this headless horseman and fears for his life as the headless horseman feels very real and starts chasing him. And the legend goes that the horseman can't cross the bridge, and Ichabod Crane gets across the bridge and turns around, and the horseman throws his disembodied head at Ichabod Crane and hits him in the face. And
it's just like, oh, can you imagine?
Yeah, how gross would that be? The story picks up later with people not knowing what happened to Ichabod Crane. He disappeared. And the indication or the implications within the story is that it was actually his competitor that was just pretending to be the Headless Horseman, knowing how much Ichabod Crane believed in that stuff. And it was a way just to drive Ichabod Crane out of town. Though some people believe the implication that he legitimately killed Ichabod Crane.
Yeah.
But the guy ends up marrying the girl, and Ichabod Crane's never heard of or seen again. But the legend of the Headless Horseman persists.
Right.
So there's this idea that, like, I think it's said that the Headless Horseman like collects heads. I think at least that's what it is in the Sleepy Hollow movie with Johnny Depp. So there's this idea that like so much head, I woke up in Sleepy Hollow, as in like I'm like this guy that's collecting heads or something, or just because that story's associated with head and headlessness, he just makes the connection to it.
But and it's just interesting that like in the story, Ichabod Crane is somebody who is seeking this woman, and not because like he loves her, because like he knows he can make a bunch of money from her and become part of like this, gain this status, have this like new heightened lifestyle, which to me just recalls a lot of what Kanye's doing here. Like there's no real, everything Kanye's talking about here, like the status he's anointing himself, it doesn't come with responsibility or anything. Some new grand mission he has, like you see in New Slaves or something, where he wants to start a revolution. Like he just wants to be the best. He wants you to see how awesome he is. And for Ichabod Crane, that comes at a price. Like he doesn't get the woman and then suffers this fate. Like you can almost wonder if Kanye's alluding to that.
Yeah, right. Like on this album, Kanye doesn't get the woman and like essentially feels lost in the world and decapitated.
Yes.
It feels like, it feels very pointed. And you can start to make comparisons as you're doing about like Kanye's relationship to fame and
Yeah.
So there's more to read into it there. And then you could also just say like he's being clever and like so much head. He woke up in the movie Sleepy Hollows on the TV, which is a dumb, simple way of reading into it. But I kind of like
the literal way.
Yeah, the very literal way. Because I always thought it was like I woke up in Sleepy Hollow.
Right. But
I woke up to Sleepy Hollow.
It is woke up to Sleepy Hollow, but I feel like you can just read it, I woke up in Sleepy Hollow. Like to is basically saying that. And if you're taking that like darker reading and thinking about like what Sleepy Hollow represents, he's saying so much head like, oh gosh, I get so much head. My life is so awesome. I woke up at Sleepy Hollow. Like, whoa, the life you live came at a cost. You now live in this like dark, creepy world where like things are not good and you don't have a good ending.
Yeah. And oh god, do we want to go like the grosser reading? Is that too literal?
The gross reading to me is how I have always read it, and this is how this is what I assume Kanye is saying, is that he's gotten so much head that his dick is, I guess I am going to be that crude, hollow, that he cannot, release anymore, if you will.
Jeez. We're going to get the YouTube version demonetized.
I said release. Come on. They're going to have to really investigate us to find this one.
I know. But yeah, you can read. I mean, you can even start to, oh God, I can't believe I'm going
Here we go.
this deep into it. But you can even say, I woke up too sleepy, hollow. So it's like just feeling the sense of being drained.
Right.
So it's I woke up TOO sleepy, hollow, which,
Man,
that is a stretch of a reading, but
that is a lot of head. Jeez.
Yeah. What's
all right? That's where we're going to get fined by YouTube.
Yeah. Okay. So we get back to the chorus. Like, can we get much higher? Oh. And at this point, like that first verse makes it feel like, yo, I'm living the life. Like I'm buying my girl Phoebe Philo, all this like sexual activity. Like I'm having Murcielagos and Diablos.
That's like 6 episodes in a row you've said the words sexual activity.
Is it?
I love it.
I don't want that to be a trend. But
start a hashtag.
Can we get much higher? Don't. The can we get much higher feels very like positive in that way at this point. And then we go into the look like a fat booty Celine Dion. Okay. So Celine Dion, famous singer. And I don't know who, he's not talking about himself, right? He's not like, I look like a fat booty Celine Dion, but he's just talking about like whatever model or girl he's with is a fat booty Celine Dion.
Whatever girl he's with that is setting the sex on fire.
Yeah, Evan's sex is on fire. I'm the king of Leona Lewis. So, okay. Triple entendre we have going on here.
Yep.
All right, so sex is on fire is a reference to Sex on Fire by Kings of Leon.
Yeah.
The 2008 song that you couldn't escape from.
Oh, I hated it.
Which, was originally going to be called Set Us on Fire and had completely different lyrics. And somebody in the studio heard them recording the song and was like, Sex on Fire, nice. Or Sex is on Fire, nice. And they're like, actually, wait. Like, that's much catchier, isn't it? And rewrote the entire song to be Sex is on Fire rather than Set Us on Fire.
They were right. It was catchier.
Yep. Did some numbers. But the song's just about, like, having sex in public, like, getting, like a blowjob while driving. Like,
yep. Sure is.
Hot as a fever, rattle of bones. I could just taste it. It's not forever.
It's like that Ed Sheeran song.
Yeah, if it's just tonight, we're still the greatest, which is weird to end this idea of like having like these sexual encounters with somebody, the sexual activity with somebody,
right?
And then ending it with like, we're still the greatest.
Yeah.
The greatest.
Like it's just how confidently and like cool Kanye seems to rap about it. And then compared to like Kings of Leon.
Yeah. And then you have the chorus, your sex is on fire, consumed with what's to transpire. And your sex is on fire, consumed. But Kanye is consumed with materialism and meaningless sex, and it's something he gets into even more on Yeezus with I'm In It. But, having sex with this fat booty Celine Dion looking person and the King of Leona Lewis. So Kings of Leon wrote that song. So that's why you get Sex is on Fire, King of Leona Lewis. Then Leona Lewis is a singer, songwriter who Kanye, I don't think had any interactions with until this point. Of just like the reference, but she's like an attractive singer who was actually really upset by Theraflu. slash cold.
Oh, that's right.
She's like very into animal rights, and she's like, I take back all the love I have for Kanye. Like, you shouldn't be bragging about like your mink dragging on the floor. But then she ended up covering only one. So I think she maybe forgave him.
That's cool.
Yeah, but you have a reference to her, and you might be like, why is he referencing her? Well, it could just be saying like the same way that he has a fat booty Celine Dion, he's the king of a Leona Lewis like girl. You could be going that route with it. But there's also King Louis,
Right.
the 16th, specifically, so Louis is spelled Louis, which looks like Louis or Luis, depending on how you, like, just if you're French enough or not. So I think he could say, like, you know, King of Leona, you wouldn't say Louis, but you say Louis because it looks like Louis. It's a stretch, but it's viable.
Hey, it makes sense
Like,
to me.
Yeah, you can see the connection of thought that's going on there. King Louis XVI was the last monarch of France, which had a monarchy for over 1,000 years. And he was the one that, like, was the victim of the French Revolution, which ushered in democracy in France. He was beheaded in front of everyone in 1792. So you have that going on as well. And he actually was one of the ones that supported the American Revolution. There's talks, if you remember history class or currently in history class, of the French helping the Americans, and that a lot of the American Revolution was made possible by the assistance from the French, and why there's such a historic relationship between America and France, with France even gifting America the Statue of Liberty. But King Louis was actually the 16th, that kicked that off, which is kind of cool, but it just so happened to coincide with the fact that, like, the French people hated him and wanted, like, the same kind of freedom that the Americans were getting, and he wasn't granting that, and then they eventually, like, arrest him and behead him. So when we talk even about, like, the idea of being judged in Lacrimosa and how that applied to Kanye and the aftermath of the Taylor Swift, it also kind of applies to King Louis, and this idea that he was, like, taken from the ashes of his kingdom and put on trial, and they found him guilty and beheaded him. So I feel like Kanye is really aware of that, and that's why he makes the King of Leona Lewis reference, because he wants the King Louis reference.
Right.
And this idea that he, like, this album is his trial, and he could end up beheaded as well. This could be the end of his reign, and the end of his career. And that's some of the tension that's on the table, that is under, like, is the subtext of the ego that he's putting on and the bravado that he's putting on. And then we even have the George Condo art that was used for this album specifically, that shows the decapitated king. Like, the decapitated Kanye wearing a crown.
Somebody with a crown on with their head off.
Yeah. And you see, like, the sword by it. And then we even have the Power video where Kanye has the sword of Damocles hanging over his head, where that whole story is just, you have, like, the point of the sword over top of you, and it could fall on you at any moment. You never know when the sword of Damocles will fall. So there's a lot of imagery that Kanye used of, like, kings being decapitated, like, off with their head, and, like, judgments that all kind of feels like it ties back to King Louis. And then you have this line specifically.
Yeah. I mean, as you noted, the big point here is the tension that is set up. Like, sex is on fire. Oh, man, his life's off him. King of Leona Lewis. Leona Lewis is a legend. Like, he's anointing himself. But then you bring in King Louis, and, like, the downfall of somebody who had achieved, like, the highest status. Obviously, Kanye is alluding to that.
Yeah, and right, you look at, like, take a step back and look at those three things. Like, King of Leon, like, musicians that were, like, hit musicians at the time. Leona Lewis is this, like, attractive woman, and Kanye is trying to, like, put himself as, like, women love me. That was, like, one of the things in the first verse. And even with the Celine Dion, like, fat booty Celine Dion line. And then, like King Louis. Like I can be any one of those three. It's the same thing that we do with Pablo, right? Like what's Pablo referred to with the life of Pablo? Is it Pablo Picasso, Pablo Escobar, like Paul the Apostle? Is it a little bit of all of them?
And Kanye, like the way he structures those lines, like it's almost like he's actively trying to make you realize he's saying King Louis, because the rhyme here is Celine Dion and King of Leon, and then it continues a Louis. So he's like bringing this in, and then Louis rhymes with beyond the truest. Like he's starting something new that you're supposed to pay attention to.
And then even taking that another step, if you're going like Louis, right? Like it should be King Louis.
Right.
Like the next rhymes that you get are like memory, energy, enemy, visit me. So like Louis rhymes with those, even if like he doesn't say Louis.
I like that. That's cool.
Yeah. Now that's
a reach.
That's a reach. But
let's pretend that's what he did.
Plausible. So okay, King of Leon Lewis, beyond the truest. I don't know. It just feels like he's just beyond truth. I don't know.
Yeah, that's just like a brag line.
Oh, the last thing, and this is definitely a stretch or reach.
I love it.
Or something to at least like pay attention to as I'm like just rubbing my eyes thinking about it. We know that the album ends with "Who Will Survive in America," as I've said many times already. So I don't know if you want to start diving into the idea that like King Louis was like partially involved in the American Revolution and like America becoming its own country and the implications of that. But there could potentially be some kind of implications to that. And this idea of, especially with like Gil Scott-Heron talking about like America and like freedom, doom, and how almost against democracy he is just because of where like it ended up with the government that America had at the time that Gil Scott-Heron was writing Who Will Survive in America. Mm-hmm. But we also know that King Louis was somebody that ended up being killed by the desire for freedom. Like the French Revolution is what killed King Louis. So there are also little residences there, which that would be like a huge...
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine Kanye sitting there being like, oh, I'm going to connect like the French Revolution with Gil Scott-Heron. But I can also imagine Kanye sitting there going like, yeah, let's connect the American Revolution with Gil Scott-Heron.
Yeah. I mean, those kinds of specific connections you can make, like that is tough. And there's no way we'd ever be able to like know if Kanye did that. But again, just think of like what we're talking about, like these larger implications of these lines and how they all kind of fit into the same mold of like looking at society and how people who stand at the top of society can reshape things or like fall from great heights. Like this is all just part of the landscape Kanye's painting.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you believe in death of the author, then it doesn't matter if Kanye knew about it or not. It just matters that it's in the text.
This show needs to exist. This show needs death of the author to be a true thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So beyond the truest, so Kanye's just like, I'm beyond the truest. Okay. Hey, teacher, tell me, how do you respond to students? And now we get yet another.
We knew this would happen.
I know, we knew this would happen. It's, God, we talked about it in the last episode. Easy. I know. And then, not to mention, this second verse was initially supposed to be on Monster, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So this whole, like, beyond the truest, hey, teacher, tell me, how do you respond to students, was on Monster. And then Kanye goes into, that's the monster with the flows, monster with the shows, monster with the clothes, monster with the hose. Buy 'em new heels just to keep 'em on their toes. Keep it Drew Hill, fly steps from the door. The plan was to drink until the pain over. So he had this whole, like, monster reference that he replaces with how do you respond to students and refresh the page and restart the memory, which is kind of
good to know he's associating that monster character with this person you're meeting right here at the beginning.
Yeah, right? Like there were some indications and hints of it up front. But it doesn't really fit with how like intense his like first verse is on Monster.
I would agree.
Which is funny. And then Jay ends up replacing that second verse. So it was Kanye 2, and then Nicki Minaj.
Jay probably heard Kanye's verse and was like, nah, I got this.
Yeah, step aside, young.
I need the sniff.
But so Teacher Teacher is from Slick Rick. It's a song by Slick Rick, 1988. And we know that Kanye would sample Slick Rick again or interpolate Slick Rick again in 2018 on No Mistakes. And we talked about how instructive that, what was it?
He sampled him on No Mistakes.
Yeah. And how instructive that song was, as in the No Mistakes song, it's Slick Rick saying like, hey, don't be this way.
Yeah.
Like, don't be like a little gremlin, like treat your parents with respect. You think you know it all where you don't. Like, this is the way that the world works. And we know that on No Mistakes, it's the first song of Kanye kind of coming out of the manic episode he's having on the first three songs. With Yikes really being the rise of the manic episode, and All Mine being like the full force of that ego and bravado, and then heading into Would It Leave, where he's just like, oh man, yep,
I fucked up.
I messed up. And then No Mistakes is like, okay, you know, I'm listening to Slick Rick, I'm changing up how I'm behaving, like I'm making amends, I'm not going to make any mistakes anymore. So here again, he has another Slick Rick song that is really instructive, called Teacher Teacher, though it's a little more like egotistical. Slick Rick starting with like, well, I've been a public figure for quite a long time, known to the whole world for what? My style of rhyme. But tonight, let's talk about the ones who bite, although they know they won't never get it right, because they have no class and they have no shame. They'll bite another brother to boost their own name. Get paid correct on a one-way gimmick. I'm happy for you lowlifes, but remember, there's a limit. So say, teacher, teacher, tell me how you do it. It looks kind of easy, like there was nothing to it, but they don't understand that the master will be the creator of the style, Ricky D. So Ricky D is the teacher in this case, and he's talking about how other rappers and would-be artists want to mimic his style, and how it seems so easy, but it's actually much harder than what it makes it out to be. And then the second verse, he's just talking about like lifestyle with like walk into a party, coke snorters laugh, and the girls be crazy coming for my mere autograph. And then the third verse, he actually has somebody accost him. So out of nowhere, some boy starts a riot. He tore my clothes. I had to throw blows. A shotgun barrel was dead on my nose. I froze. It was Bigfoot in the toes, which might be why Kanye sampled this on Monster, since he calls out Bigfoot, but not Loch Ness, Godzilla, ghoul, goblin, or a zombie with no conscience. But yep, a bunch of small timers that be at all my shows surrounded the ruler with machetes too. They said, if you don't teach us how to rap, you're through. I said, okay, now let me go, please. I seen an officer. Then the officer screamed, freeze. He said, Slick Rick, you okay? I had to play it off. Some girls were looking my way, so I smacked one in the face and told him I won't retire. So I think that's smacking one of the people that are going to rob him, that the cop now has like frozen. And for many years from now, I'll just be getting higher. For I am the master, said and done. My name is Ricky D. I'm the only one, so say. And then he gets into the chorus. Now, you may hopefully have caught, and many years from now, I'll just be getting higher. For I am the master, said and done. So in this song, Teacher, Teacher, Slick Rick is talking about how he is going to just keep elevating, and he's going to keep getting better and better and keep getting specifically higher. And now Kanye in this song has that line, can we get much higher? So he references yet another song that talks about like rising up in the sky and this idea of ascending, but also in his song specifically talking about the idea of, can I get any higher? Is this my limit? Am I about to fall? So Slick Rick doesn't have any of those negative implications, but it's almost like Kanye is channeling Slick Rick here, because there is a little bit of increasing sense of things are going to take a downturn, and he's turning to the teacher to try to get some answers. Like, how do you respond to students? Like, Kanye has people coming to him, but also like, how would you respond to me? And refresh the page and restart the memory. Like, how do I get back to writing? And how do I clear my mind from the things that I know? And respark the soul and rebuild the energy? How do I get my creative spirit back? How do I get back to this? And, you know, in 2009, 2010, Kanye was seriously thinking about stepping away from music forever. and just going into fashion, just doing other things. So you could start to read this, if you're relating it to him specifically and where his life was at, as like him questioning the status of his career and tying that back to, can we get much higher? Should I keep going? Like, how do I return to music when I'm feeling like my soul doesn't have the spark or the energy and the page feels filled?
Yeah. That's so interesting to think that like he's painting the sky like this. Like this is the first, we came into this season saying like, oh, we know everything about this album, we're good. This is really the first thing I'm kind of realizing that he does really well that I had never grasped before. And it makes me think of the movie and how important the sky is in the Runaway Movie. How we start with something coming from the sky, and the sky is red and feels apocalyptic, and there's power in like getting away from the sky and going inside. Like there's a lot going on there. And to think that like the sky has such life, both in the movie and now the album, and how all of these samples and allusions to other songs that talk about the sky and like what the sky represents in terms of like things you can achieve and like in fame and the importance of being that high, the image you give off being that high. It's really interesting to think like all of that language is surrounding the sky, all in service of, as you're saying, like him falling from the sky. like it's only bad. Like, can we get much higher? Like, ugh, like it sounds like you've reached your height and like you're gonna fall eventually. To know that, like all this tragedy is now being associated with the sky in the first song of the album. Like this is what's being set up as like, like usually you work your way up to that height. Like here we're starting with him there.
Yeah, because we're just going to investigate like the fall and then the transition to the fantasy and yada yada yada.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I mean, you kind of wonder in a way if like it sets up, like this could be like Kanye thinking, because we talk about how each Kanye album is about the period of his life between albums. Mm-hmm. So 808s covers the period like right after graduation to when he released 808s. Like graduation covers from when Late Registration came out to when graduation came out. So, like The Life of Pablo covers from between Yeezus to when that came out. So that 2013 to 2016. It almost makes you wonder if you could start to make an argument that some of these songs kind of like precede the Taylor Swift incident.
Right.
And this is Kanye like in 2008, early 2009, thinking about like where he's at in his career and his life. And he's thinking like, can we get much higher? And then the fall is the Taylor Swift.
Yeah. You could read it that way, because I knew a lot of people, and I even think this is what Cole's theory was on his Dissect season. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with it, but a lot of people do think that all of the lights and the woman on there like is Taylor, and it's all a build to this moment where like he goes too far, with the ego and everything, and then falls. So you could be right about that. Yeah,
I wonder if I don't know if I associate all of the lights with the events so much as I would think like almost the interlude is the events, and then or the end of Power is the events, like.
Right. Or just like, because I always think of the women on Kanye songs as like, it feels too simple to like personify like one thing and like one person, one event. It's always like, a cavalcade of like so many different things. So yeah, I think I'm on the same page as you, is that like that whole section of the album is just surrounding that moment, because obviously that's the part where nobody likes Kanye anymore, and it doesn't matter how egotistical he acts. Like, no one likes you. So yeah.
We'll get there.
Yeah,
we'll see. Man, but yeah, and just what you're saying, like, I think that's one of the interesting things when you talk about the Runaway Movie in the sky, is a sense that like we see how Kanye kind of brings in those elements through the samples and the interpolations, and keeps bringing us back to the idea of the sky in these very subtle ways that aren't like in the lyrics themselves. He's not saying like, I touch the sky and sky, but he has like 3 different samples that reference the sky in some different way.
Very cinematic.
Yeah. And then in the movie, you see how much emphasis is put on the sky, even though the story itself is very much takes place on the ground between these two characters, or the characters and the people at the dinner and things like that. But
Yeah.
the sky is absolutely an important part of the film, and you can just see how Kanye translates that concept between music and film.
We love it.
So respark the soul and rebuild the energy. These are the questions he has for the teacher. But then we stopped the ignorance. We killed the enemy. I don't know if I have like a great interpretation of what that could get to or get at.
Yeah, I guess he's asking these questions and then says like, I guess, how do you almost wonder if like refresh the page, restart the memory, respark the soul, rebuild the energy. If he's speaking broader, like how do we inspire people to do this? Like he's asking the teacher how you respond to students and get them on this page.
Definitely.
Which would call forward to like Jesus and like him wanting to start a revolution. Like he's still kind of asking those questions and figuring out how to do that. But then we stopped the ignorance, we killed the enemy. Like he thinks he's in this place of like, I have the power to do these things and do it. Like, how do I get these people to then like mimic me and get on my level?
I guess so. Is that like, I mean, that's the only like reading. It is that arrogant, like, yeah, we stopped ignorance, we killed the enemy.
And sorry for the night demons that still visit. Like he's saying, like, we did this thing. Sorry for this thing that was like the result of it or like part of it. You know?
Well, yeah, that's the undercut, right? Because it's like the we stop the ignorance, we kill the enemy makes it feel like there's nothing more that could be like we eradicated all obstacles in our way.
Right.
But sorry for the night demons that still visit me. Despite clearing the way for what you would imagine is only goodness, there's something that still lingers that haunts him that's not right. And I think that kind of gets back to this idea of like refreshing the page and restarting the memory. And as you said, there's that reading that applies it to Kanye and Kanye feeling a little lost and looking for direction. But there's also that like macro idea of Kanye looking at society and asking the teacher, how do we get everybody else in society to like feel refreshed and like have the soul back and change things from how they are, which really does start to tie into Jesus, the life of Pablo, especially getting into Saint Pablo, and then where Kanye is at currently with like, yay, kids see ghosts, Jesus is king, and trying to be a messenger.
Yeah. That's interesting.
But also on Jesus on I'm In It, he talks about like what like goes to sleep with the nightlight and like feeling like there are these demons that still haunt him.
Yeah.
But this idea of still having demons. So despite like stopping ignorance and killing the enemy, there's still these personal issues that he has that haunt him. And that's what transitions us into this next part with the plan was to drink. Man, sorry for the night demons that still visit me. And then this song was originally part of Monster.
Yeah.
And then on Monster, he's the monster.
Yeah.
Like, is he one of the night demons?
He's been shaped by his demons for sure.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. But the plan was to drink until the pain over. Yeah. It sounds very monstery.
Yeah.
Call it Malibu. Yeah. So the plan was to drink until the pain over. But what's worse, the pain or the hangover? Man, I love that line so much.
It's so good.
Like, you try to self-soothe and self-medicate, but sometimes the hangover is even worse than the pain you're trying to like deal with. So you're just you're in a lose-lose scenario, because by trying to cope in this destructive way, you just end up creating more pain.
Yeah, and you drink to battle the night demons that you have, and in that way, like, addiction and alcohol and drugs like becomes part of your demons, becomes part of that hellscape that he continues to talk about for a while. It doesn't really get past until like kids see ghosts, when he lets God back into his life.
Well, even I was going through the Donda listening party too recently, and there's like a number of times he talks about alcoholism and like drinking too much, and you're just like, okay, well,
I guess probably more looking back on it. Yeah.
It still is like something that is coming up in his
Right.
discography. And then you get fresh air rolling down the window, which like the fresh air feels very needed, right? That's essentially what he was talking about with the teacher. Like, I need to refresh the page, re-spark the soul. I'm going to roll down the window just to get some fresh air, which people do in cars when they're feeling sick. But which is funny because it pays off on like the Murcielago and the Diablo, right? Like in the first verses, he's just like bumping music in those cars and like living the dream. And now it's like, yeah, he's feeling sick and rolling down the windows. And still tries to be like a little egotistical, right? Too many Urkels on your team. That's why your win's low. Like, starting to get a little bit of the ego back, which like Steve Urkel, beloved character from Family Matters, and people called it the Urkel Show. And the first season was very much about the Winslow family, with Urkel being the kooky, nerdy neighbor that would come over sometimes. But then Urkel was so popular that the show just became the Urkel Show, like with the Winslow family responding to Steve. And it lost a lot of its heart and became a little bit more of a, almost like a comic show, or like a dark twisted fantasy. As like Steve creates technology that turns him into Stefan, so he's no longer nerdy but smooth. They like, I think there's an episode where they like shrink or switch bodies. It's just, it goes a little crazy. But Kanye just kind of calling out like, you have too many lames on your team. That's why you're Winslow, which the Winslows were the family that Urkel followed around. So just saying you're losing a lot, your wins are low, but it's also the Winslow family. Nice.
Yeah. I I'm kind of looking at all the verses now because I'm looking at that line, too many Urkels on your team, so you're Winslow. This verse had largely been like pretty serious. And Kanye kind of talking about his place and looking for advice and how do I inspire people. We go from the first verse, which is nothing but bravado, and Kanye setting himself in that way, to even at the beginning of verse 2, it starts out like, oh, I got this fat booty Celine Dion, like I'm beyond the truest. He's elevating himself, but then has to pull himself back. Like, how do you respond to students? How do you refresh the page, restart the memory? Like, how do I spark something bigger? And it's just interesting that it kind of really zaps the energy away, even though like you still have the beat, you still have Kanye's sick flow, like it gives off this presence of bravado. It starts to not really have that. And this line then kind of like sticks out of like, he's, talking trash to the other team. That's why you're Winslow, with this like playful reference. It's I don't know, it's just interesting that like all of the twists and turns and ebbs and flow this takes, because at this point you have to assume like, well, Kanye, like he seems like he's battling demons, and that like he maybe doesn't like being a celebrity as much as he pretends he does in the first verse. Like, what's going on here?
Yeah. The bravado starts to feel a little hollow.
Yeah.
And then we get "Don't Make Me Pull the Toys
Then
Out."
you get this,
huh?
yeah.
Don't make me pull the toys and fire up the engines, huh? And then they make noise. Which, I mean, I always take this as like okay. We know that Kanye doesn't do a lot of like gangster rap talk, but we know that on a lot of his mixtapes he was talking about like, oh, I'll pull the like, not the AK, but he would like mention something about like pulling some kind of gun out, or like he'll kill another MC kind of thing. I feel like this is kind of getting close to that. Like, don't make me pull the toys out, which would be like his weapons, and fire up the engines. Like, they make noise, like they go bang, 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 like blat, blat, blat.
Right.
So I always take this as kind of like that bravado really reaching maximum and just going to a place that's kind of like absurd. But it's also like done in a childish way when you've talked about like students and like almost like dealing with children in that middle portion, and then talking about like pulling toys out and fire up the engine. It feels like you're like trying to entertain children, or like condescendingly talk to people you think are children.
Yeah. I guess it just like, it reminds me of New Slaves, this really unhealthy way of like achieving your goals. Like you think of all the people that are standing in your way, your enemies, and he's talking about pulling the toys out, firing up the engines. And on New Slaves, he's like, came on her, you know, he's going to fuck the woman, the guy's wife. And like, that's going to be his way. He gets back at like, it just seems like somebody who feels really lost and manic in a moment where like they do actually like, they want to do more. They don't want to just be the celebrity that everyone looks at and is like, that's all Kanye is. He wants something more. And he never really gets there in the song. And instead we see him kind of react like this.
Yep. Very much so. He just starts to fall into aggressiveness.
Right.
And that aggressiveness also comes back in Gorgeous as well.
Yeah, right.
And there's, I mean, aggressiveness that happens throughout a lot of this album, but we can see that mixture of like bravado, like self-reflection and pain, and then aggression that comes out of that. And that was something that we talked about on Yeezus as well, on the podcast, and as well as the Yeezus season we did for Dissect, was that Kanye falls into that bravado. Like he oscillates between like the devil on one shoulder that manifests as like Chief Keef, and the angel on the other shoulder that manifests as like Justin Vernon on Hold My Liquor. And you have the vulnerability of Justin Vernon with the audacity and ego of a Chief Keef.
Yeah.
And how you see that then with I'm In It, with Assassin and Justin Vernon, how you see it on moments of Blood on the Leaves, and going throughout the album, there's just Kanye wrestling with these moments of like, I need to flex. I need to have this bravado. The same thing on The Life of Pablo. Father Stretch My Hands Part 1 is bravado. Father Stretch My Hands Part 2 is, in the first verse, like vulnerability. Like, I have these things that scare me. I have these pains and this lostness. And then he goes into designer, right? And just kind of throws in this braggadocio and superficiality that hides the pain that he's feeling. So maybe he's doing something like that here.
Yeah, I love it.
So then Can We Get Much Higher comes back in, and it starts to feel a little bit more negative at this point.
Just a little bit.
And just a little. And then we get the bridge with Justin Vernon and Kanye. At the mall, there was a seance. Just kids, no parents, which kind of goes back to the teacher and the pull the toys out. There's something with this idea of like being a kid, and even power having like my childlike creativity, purity, and honesty is honestly being prodded by these grown thoughts. Reality is catching up with me, taking my inner child. I'm fighting for it, custody. So I don't know if that gets back to that, and it's just like there was a seance, and it's involving like your inner child and not like the adult aspects of it.
That's a really interesting part of all this, because you have to think of Kanye's story and how he doesn't have his mom anymore, and he doesn't really know how to grow up. Like, that's just such a motif in all of his stuff, especially once he starts to have kids and like enters that phase of being a father. That's such an interesting part of his timeline.
Well, then it also gets into, as you're saying, like the teacher spot, talking about like society and Kanye wanting to inspire others. And what we talk about with Yeezus as well in that aspect. So it's almost like, there was a seance that involved like the next generation, like the youth. It didn't involve the parents, because the parents are already like lost causes.
Right.
And maybe you could view it as like it's an indoctrination. Like this seance is something that is going to get the kids to either rebel, or it's going to get the kids to fall into line.
Ooh, man. God. Jeez. Are we going to be able to handle a whole season of this?
No.
Okay.
This is our longest episode in a while.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God.
And just, you talk about Kanye not having his mom. A seance is usually like something to connect with the deceased.
Uh-huh.
Like you have a seance to talk to like your spouse that passed away, your sibling that passed away, a parent that passed away. So it's almost like, there is some undertones of like going to the mall and having the seance and trying to talk to Donda.
Right.
But in the wake of this seance, some creepy things start to happen, right? The sky filled with herons.
Herons.
Which heron's just a type of bird.
Yeah.
I mean, Genius tries to say that like in Egyptian mythology, they stand for light and goodness, which I don't know if Kanye is like up on Egyptian mythology, but I don't know. I can imagine people being like, but you think he's up on like the monarchy of the French? Like, okay.
Yeah, right.
So maybe it's like the sky filled with something that's like symbolic of like goodness, and then saw the devil in a Chrysler LeBaron. But I also figure he just wants to rhyme with like Chrysler LeBaron. And in movies, they usually associate like the devil and the coming of the devil with like flocks of birds. Right. Like crows fill the sky, or like birds go like swooping through the sky in like a long line because they feel something evil in the world. So I always took it as like something is just like negative. I mean, we've also talked about Who Will Survive in America, and it's Gil Scott-Heron. So it's almost like Gil Scott-Heron, like his presence, right? Like knowing what the youth is going through, this idea of who will survive in America and what's happening to the youth in America.
Yeah. And to think all that negative energy is associated with the seance, which I don't think a seance is necessarily like a bad thing. You're trying to communicate with spirits. And I mean, that idea that like you're a kid and like maybe you're trying to communicate with your mom. I don't know. Maybe that's more of a stretch, but like why the seance is even happening in a moment where Kanye like wants to do more and is looking for advice from the teacher. And then from the seance, like these, the devil appears. Like it's so strange. Like to this day, I'm not even sure how to take it. I just am in awe how cool it sounds.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does feel like a transition from like reality to fantasy,
yes,
right? It's like it is suddenly like things are escalating. Like the seance happens, which is a mystical thing. Sometimes they go wrong, like Hereditary.
Right.
There's a seance that goes wrong. But they're not inherently bad in every portrayal. But then the sky filled with herons. And when you're talking about like, can we get much higher and have so many like references relating to the sky, the fact that the sky is now like clogged in some way does feel like the start of like, yeah, you're not going to be able to ascend because there's all these herons.
Right.
And then you see the devil in a Chrysler LeBaron, which the fact that he just mixes like devil and Chrysler.
Oh yeah.
Is kind of cool. But then I don't know if there's anything in particular to the LeBaron itself. I don't know if that's a reference to people showing like the devil driving like a cool car or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the first thing I think of is the fact that he's referenced cars throughout the song as a good thing, and then all of a sudden, like, the devil's in a car, like a nice car.
Yeah, which like the LeBarons were nicer back in the day, right?
I guess so.
By the time like 2010 came around, the Chrysler LeBaron was not like a top of the line motor vehicle.
Yeah, so like the devil is presented as like somebody from yesteryear who looks cool, like an older Kanye version of Kanye.
A little like classic rock look about him.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, that is like a motif, right? You have the Lamborghini, you have the Murcielago and the Diablo version, but then you have literally the devil in another kind of car. It does start to make all the cars feel like a little more polluted in that way.
Yeah.
So we go from saw the devil in a Chrysler LeBaron and the hell it wouldn't spare us. So it's almost like a vision of the future. And the fires did declare us. So what? Hell doesn't spare us. The fire like consumes us, declares us, like takes us over.
Right.
Declares us its like possession of him. I don't know. But after that, took pills, kissed an heiress, and woke up back in Paris. So it's like you have this vision of a mall seance that leads to a sky full of herons and seeing the devil and a vision of hell. And then after either going through that and waking up, you took pills, kissed an heiress, and woke up back in Paris, or it was just part of the same dream. And all of that, like the fires of hell lead to taking pills, kissing an heiress, and then you just wake up back in like a hotel room in Paris.
Yeah. It's I think you mentioned this earlier, but like the idea that you take a pill to like cloud out what's happening to you. or like it just seems to describe a trip, and that you can like indulge in these things to escape from your demons and the hell of your life and everything. I feel like that's what this whole bridge really is painting, like him having to confront his demons and then coming out the other side, waking up back in Paris, which paints this idea of like this wonderful life that he described in the first verse. But we've gone on this big long journey now and seen all of this imagery, and we know by the time he wakes up back in Paris, like things may not be so good.
Yeah. And I mean, we even had in the previous, like, sorry for the night demons that still visit me. The plan was to drink until the pain over. What's worse, the pain or the hangover? And then he has this, like, literal vision of the devil and hell, and then takes a pill.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, he's being visited by his, like, demon, and then, like, washing it away with not just alcohol but a pill as well.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's the start of a disastrous cycle.
Ooh, Kiss and Eris, is that an allusion to Sleepy Hollow?
I mean, yeah, that could be. The girl is kind of like an heiress of her dad's like farm fortune. I mean, it's also probably a reference to Paris Hilton. Paris Hilton is the daughter of the Hilton family, so she is an heiress in that way. And there was a sex tape that came out called One Night in Paris. That was like Paris Hilton's sex tape.
So is that what he means when he woke up in Paris?
It could be.
Oh God, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, so it might be a little bit of like a
wow.
Yeah.
Damn, Kanye.
Yeah, like physically in multiple ways in Paris.
Wow.
Yeah. So then can we get much higher? And you're kind of like, dude, I think you're really high right now.
Yeah.
And that's where it starts to turn from like success to the failure of success to like actually like you might just be too high on like drugs and alcohol, and you're starting to have these visions.
Yeah. And then the song kind of closes out with like, can we get much higher? Over and over. And then again, does that thing where like it never quite takes off. Like you get the dun, 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 and then bum, bum, and then just people singing. Like it never does the thing you expect it to. Like if you've gotten so high to like finally take that last step and go as high as you can, like you've reached the height.
Yeah, you're waiting for it to like blast off, but that it never does. It just shows that there's like a ceiling and a limitation that's being explored.
Man, and it kind of, I feel like sometimes I shit on the production of Gorgeous. Not shit on it, but in the sense that like it's very traditional and just like samey throughout the entire song. Then Kanye's just rapping over the beat, but I guess that kind of makes sense for this moment where Kanye can't go any higher, and he's just like at this heightened level on the same plane the entire time, like looking at everything.
Yeah, if he kind of feels like he's like hit a plateau or hit a ceiling. And then also thinking about it in terms of like it is grounded in the real world a little bit more than the other like songs. So there is something that's fitting about it not being as like bright or bombastic or like gorgeous.
Yeah.
As lush as something like All of the Lights or Devil in a New Dress or Runaway.
Right.
It's just one of the like murky songs that's in reality and kind of stripped away. And yeah.
Wow. Okay. Awesome. Love this song. This song's such a banner.
Wow. Yeah. Do we have anything to say on whatchamacallit? Dark Fantasy? Does that complete it? Oh God.
Wow. Should we talk for another 2 hours and 14 minutes maybe?
Yo. So like listeners, we're planning on like possibly not doing this episode today because we're like, well, can we do it in a short enough time? Like, you know, let's do it. Like maybe we can be done by like 4:30, and it's currently 5:30. That's insane.
Chris, you still have to go to the gym?
I don't know if I'll have the time. Do you still have a bunch of like errands and yard work to do?
Yeah, still have to. I may get in trouble for not helping with the yard work. I'm looking outside to see if Lauren's by. But yeah, I might get in trouble for that part. But Got enough time for the errands. That'll be okay.
Yeah, this is our dedication to you, lovely fans. So we will be back with Gorgeous and digging into, man, what Kanye does on that song, which he does some awesome stuff in terms of the use of vignettes and couplets, and it is layered and gets further into this deconstruction that he has of society.
Yeah. A lot of people consider it to be his best song, like lyrically.
Yep. So we'll get into why, and is it?
But until we do that, we need you to get higher. No, we need you to just stay wavy.
That's right. Don't try to get more wavy. I mean, you can if you want, but just stay wavy.
Don't get too wavy though. Like that's dangerous.
No. Keep it
And you get seasick.